selling bold ideas in the boardroom. Welcome to the Better Boards podcast series, the podcast for chairs, CEOs, non-executive directors, company secretaries, and their advisors. Every episode is filled with practical insights and learnings from those inside the boardroom. We discuss what really matters and highlight actionable steps you can take to enhance the performance of your board. In this episode, I have the great pleasure to speak with Andy Palmer. Andy Palmer is known to automotive buffs. He's in the Hall of Fame and the most famous British person in the global automotive business, as voted by Auto Express. He has been the CEO of some of the most iconic organizations in the industry, but not only that, he sets up many businesses in the clean transportation space. It's an inspiring story. So very happy to share, and I hope you will enjoy it. Besides some practical tips and insights, I think you get a good dose of inspiration. Andy, welcome to the Better Boards podcast series. We are absolutely thrilled to have you, and thank you for contributing.
I'm thrilled to be here.
Andy, you had an absolutely remarkable career in the auto industry. It goes as far as in 2012, Auto Express voted you into their Hall of Fame as the most famous British person in the global automotive business.
They were very kind.
Can you share with our readers how you really did it, how you rose from being an apprentice to being a member of the C-suite and CEOs, not of any car company, but really the most iconic organizations in the industry?
Oh, look, a combination, I guess, of a burning desire, of hard work, and a little bit of luck, I guess. Everybody needs a little bit of luck. But my journey started when I was, 14 years old. My father bought me an old A-Series engine. You remember that the A-Series was the engine that was in Isigonis's Mini. It was a Strat one. And he knew I had an interest in technical drawing and metalwork and things. So he assumed that I'd have an interest in engines. And so I learned basically by taking the engine apart and putting it back together, I learned how an engine worked. And that inspired me. Honestly, I wasn't thrilled about school. I didn't get much passion. I didn't go to a particularly good school either. And so the first opportunity I had to leave school was 15. And at 16, I started an apprenticeship, a technical apprenticeship with a company called Automotive Products that makes clutches and brakes. And it was a 4-year apprenticeship. And I pretty much learned the basics of engineering and did what in the UK is called a higher national certificate. And at the end of those 4 years, I came out into what was AP's advanced engineering and was working on, this is 1979 I started working. And so 1983, I guess I was working in advanced engineering on what became dual clutch transmissions. What I recognized then was we were in the middle of what was called wildcat strikes in the United Kingdom. There was a guy called Red Robbo that worked at Aston Rover. They were constantly on strike. It was constant industrial action. Margaret Thatcher was the prime minister, and it was a horrible, ugly time. And everybody had to be in a union. And so we were constantly on strike. And I as a naive and arrogant 20-year-old, just thought, this is crazy. Management and unions essentially want the same thing. I'd say the same to Volkswagen today. Basically the bosses want the company to be successful so they can get their salaries, and the staff want the company to be successful so that they can get paid. And it seemed to me that there was more in alignment than in misalignment. And so I came up with this crazy ambition at 20 years old that I wanted to be the CEO of a car company, and then embarked upon my own personal corporate plan on how to get there, which started by going to essentially university in the evenings and studying for my degree in industrial management. That got me an interview with Austin Rover, and I moved across to Austin Rover and was very lucky to get onto their fast track of management. They also recognized that I needed a degree, in their opinion. I don't necessarily agree with them, but they thought I needed a degree in engineering. So I went and did a master's degree on a part-time basis at Warwick University. At the same time, was being promoted through the ranks of Austin Rover quite quickly to eventually becoming the chief engineer for transmissions at the company, and working with Honda. If you remember back then, Rover and Honda had a coalition, and I was lucky enough to be one of the interfaces into that coalition. I also read a book called The Machine That Changed the World, which was written by MIT and was all about essentially lean manufacturing.
Yeah.
And these two things together inspired me to go and work with the Japanese for maybe 3 or 5 years was my plan, learn what they were doing, and then bring that back to the British car industry. And as I said, I got my master's degree in engineering during that period of time. I then moved to Nissan for those 3 or 5 years. It actually ended up being 23 years, 10 years in the United Kingdom, eventually leading engineering in Europe for Nissan. And then moving to Japan as part of the Renault Alliance to take over and lead light commercial vehicles in a business function for the company. During that period of time, I both finished a PhD in engineering and did basically an MBA at a London Business School to widen my scope. So in the end, I bizarrely, for a guy that left school at 15, I became quite highly qualified. And again, was lucky enough under Carlos Ghosn, and we can talk about Carlos Ghosn if you like. Under Carlos Ghosn, got promoted quite quickly. First of all, heading planning for Nissan, doing all the product planning and corporate planning, then taking responsibility for IT, taking responsibility for sales, marketing, PR. I inherited, obviously, the light commercial vehicle division, but also because it was so successful, I also inherited basically Infinity and set up perhaps something that has become synonymous with my reputation, I suppose, which is basically the zero emission business unit. The zero emission business unit is what invented the Nissan Leaf, essentially the first mass production EV.
You know what I find so remarkable about this, Andy, is there's millions of parents in the UK and in other countries as well, actually, who bend over to get their kids into the best schools. They break the bank in order to pay high school fees.
Yeah.
I mean, you are a fantastic example. It doesn't need to be that way.
It doesn't need, look, you can give your kids a head start by sending them to a nice school and getting them properly educated, and I would never discredit that. But in the end, it's down to you as an individual. Almost no matter how you start, if you're prepared to put in the hard yards, if you're prepared to put in the effort. You know, my kids say to me, Dad, what do I have to do to be successful like you? And my answer is always the same: work, work, work. And look, if you want to get to be a CEO of any kind of a company, for sure, there isn't such a thing as work-life balance. Not unless you're much smarter than me anyway. You have to work at it and you have to make sacrifices along the way. And, you know, for sure, I'd like to think that my kids got the benefits of me working hard insofar as they got a good education and they got a nice place to live and et cetera, but they also had sacrifice because they didn't see me that much while I was working my way up the career ladder. So I think, there's a natural talent, there is an education element, but more than anything else, if you want to get on, then you've got to work hard.
I mean, what's so remarkable about this career is also that you've done it in very different types of organization. I mean, you mentioned Nissan. Then there was this iconic brand, Aston Martin.
Yeah.
And then the startup Switch Mobility, former Optare. And today you sit on the boards of numerous companies in the clean transport space, as you already mentioned, and you founded your own energy startup. Now, a lot of executives struggle to thrive in one organization or in one type of organization. You did it in very different types of organization.
Yeah.
How did you manage?
I love the interdisciplinary. So I love the fact that I got to experience engineering, sales, marketing, and manufacturing. So I was able to experience those because I think it makes you a more rounded executive. But I also love the fact that I got to spend time in cars, in vans, in trucks, in buses. And then when I left Aston, I took a thought about what I wanted to do next. You know, what that thinking brought me back to was Leaf, the development of the Nissan Leaf. When I started Nissan Leaf, I wanted it to be something that at the time we called zero well to wheel. So from the oil well to the steering wheel, zero. What today everybody calls net zero. And so when we started Leaf, the goal was to be net zero. And we failed, honestly. It was too hard to corral all the different industries that you need to corral to make something net zero. You know, your steel has to be carbon free. We didn't know how to do that. Your charging infrastructure needs to be carbon free. We didn't have a partner that knew how to do that. The cars are interconnected, so we had to work with, you know, the likes of the mobile phone companies, and we didn't know how to do that. So we had to give up. And what we ended up with was saying, okay, let's make Leaf zero emission. Let's take away the tailpipe, essentially. And so we succeeded in bringing a car to market that was zero tailpipe, zero emissions, essentially, at least zero engine emissions. And in 2020, when you know I left Aston, I thought about it and said, okay, what do I need to understand that would allow me to solve that problem? And so I embarked upon a new career, essentially, of looking at the zero emission problem from different points of view. So look at it from the battery point of view. And when you look at battery, you've really got to look at the 3 C's: chemistry, control, and cooling. And so I started to chair companies in that space. I wanted to look at it from the bus and truck point of view. So I started and founded Switch. I wanted to look at it from the micro-mobility point of view. So I founded Hilo. And more than anything, I wanted to look at it from the energy point of view. And that's the big challenge, I think. So I joined PodPoint. I became the CEO of PodPoint for a while. PodPoint is 54% owned by EDF. And so I started a relationship with EDF. And what I discovered through that relationship, it's more than just about the grid. It's also about the evolution of the grid, and in particular, how you can use batteries within the infrastructure, how you can use solar within the infrastructure. And so I founded a company called Palmer Automotive, which sells batteries, and Palmer Energy, which is all about energy storage. And so by looking at it from different perspectives, you can see the challenges that are associated with moving a whole industry to net zero, and you constantly learn. And that's what drives me. That drives me to work 7 days a week, 15 hours a day.
You must be. I mean, it's a remarkable portfolio. It's just leaves you speechless. Yeah.
Thank you.
Because a lot of listeners, of course, sit on boards or people who want to sit on boards. And I mean, what you said about the Nissan Leaf, at that time you were an executive.
Yeah.
How did you manage to sell such a bold idea to the board? Because you needed their backing in order to do that.
Yeah, it was tough. It was tough. Interestingly, though, I was head of including sales, and in particular Japanese sales. And Nissan owns its sales network in Japan. And the Japanese executives were complaining like hell that they weren't able to sell the products that we were developing. And their point was there was this thing called the Toyota Prius that, excuse my vernacular English, but it was kicking our ass because everybody suddenly wanted a hybrid. And particularly the Japanese sales executives were saying, we need the equivalent. We need the Nissan Prius. And to me, as a planning guy and as an engineer, it didn't make sense. I was aware of technology in engineering based upon the work that Nissan had done for the Californian compliance car, which would suggest that we had technology to go to full electric. Plus, I also thought that a Me Too product, just following Toyota, wasn't going to work. So I proposed a leapfrog. Essentially, I gave the sales guys a nothing or everything option, which was you can have what you have today, internal combustion engine, or you can have battery electric. But I'm not going to propose that we do a merger of the two, that you're going to have two technologies in one car. And I was very lucky insofar as Carlos Ghosn decided to support me. And it's an interesting part of change management, how important having, when the whole company is essentially against you, how important air cover is. And Carlos Ghosn provided the air cover, at least for the duration of the time that I was in the role. And, got behind the idea that we could leapfrog. And I believe ultimately we were correct, because around the same time, inside Honda was having a similar conversation. And they chose to follow Toyota and create a hybrid. They created the Honda Insight. And as you know, it essentially failed in the market. Whereas the Leaf was highly successful in essentially bringing this idea of battery electrics for the very, very first time, way ahead of Tesla, bringing that capability to market. And today, it doesn't look as maybe risky as it was back then, but everybody now is moving towards electric vehicles.
Let's focus on this a little bit, because at the time it was a very bold idea. I mean, that really deserves the word bold, yeah? And it, as you said, it was a leapfrog idea. Today, very often when I see boards and observe boards, I don't see really many CEOs or executives who dare to stick out their head this much.
No, and why would you in many cases? I mean, when you do speak up, and look, I have plenty of examples of being attacked as a CEO for trying to be innovative, but the press will make the most of going after you. Sometimes if you're listed in the company, you can have shorting of your company. You've got the financial authorities that can come after you. You can see that happen to Elon Musk on at least a couple of occasions. So basically, being a CEO should be about leadership, but there's so much about corporate governance that sort of forces you to be safe. And look, I'm not proposing that you don't need very good corporate governance. You do, but I do also think that it's a duty of the non-executives to support the CEO in being innovative, in being brave, in trying to move the business.
Absolutely.
Albeit by putting good corporate governance around them to make sure that risks are mitigated. But risks being mitigated doesn't mean extinguishing innovation.
And particularly now, which is why I'm zooming in on this idea, given the times we are in, we need so much. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Look, and I'll be a little bit controversial here, but I hear a lot of Western car executives right now complaining about the legislation in Europe, what the UK calls the ZEV mandate, where it forces manufacturers to move towards electric vehicles. And they'll say, they can't sell internal combustion engines because of it, that they're losing profitability. My point of view is it has nothing to do with the ZEV mandates or the EU mandates. It's got everything to do with executives sitting on their backsides and not moving fast enough, not being innovative enough, not seeing the warning signals, not reading the room properly, and moving their companies strategically towards a new type of powertrain. Now, the Chinese saw it. The Chinese have exploited it. But it was visible to everybody. And those companies that are now fallen behind, which includes my old shop, Nissan, but also Ford and Stellantis. People losing their jobs because of it. This is bad management. This is nothing to do with challenges from the Chinese. It's about not reading the room, not reading the market correctly, and not innovating in accordance with that obvious need to move.
So how can people do this? How did you do this? How can executives get exactly that skill, and how can boards tease out these abilities in executives?
Well, I honestly think, number one, any executive has got to surround themselves by the right people. So don't be afraid of having clever people around you. I've always been very happy to be the lowest IQ in the room. So you really, you want people. And I found that means multidisciplinary, and it also means multicultural and multi-gender. So I was very lucky to have helped create something called a market intelligence group, which was mainly philosophy students that were working inside Nissan, mostly women and mostly Japanese. But also I had around me other nationalities with different skills. So I was able to draw upon and interpret what was happening in terms of future generations, why Gen Z finds sustainability so important. When you start to understand their mindsets, you can see ultimately they're losing interest in cars and more interested in the environment. So if you interpret that, then ultimately you end up with an answer that says you've got to have something green. Your engineers will then tell you what the best way of getting to green is, and that's where you come up with EVs. Then you need a supportive board. You need a supportive CEO if you're not the CEO, and you need a supportive board. And you need the skill sets, why I did my MBA. You need a skill set which allows you to communicate in a very coherent way why you need to take the risk. And that's coherent from a market understanding point of view. It's coherent from a technology point of view, but most importantly, it's coherent from a financial point of view. So you need to speak the language of different types of disciplines, and you need to create an ability to build empathy with those people. So, even the people that don't really necessarily get it, they're at least prepared to be neutral and give you a chance to succeed.
Fantastic. I mean, we could go on and on, but sadly we have to come to an end. And at the end, there's always this tricky question. What are the 3 things our listeners should really take away from this podcast?
Wow. Okay, I should have prepared better for it, because I would normally have said work, and those are 3 things.
Yeah.
But if I go beyond, it's try to find something in your career that you love. For me, that's easy. As I said, from 14 years old, probably even before that, I love cars. I love transport. I love anything with wheels. And so for me, working is a pleasure rather than a task. So I think anybody that's listening to this may be thinking about going to university or what they're doing post-university. Try to find something that you can be passionate about. Secondly, education is more than just studying a particular subject. Academia is about personal growth. So for sure, you've got to build deep roots. You've got to know a particular discipline very well, engineering in my case. But also you've got to understand that you also need to build your skill sets in other areas, like finance, for example, like communication more than anything. So how you communicate is so important, particularly as you go from, let's say, engineer to manager to leader. The further up that you go, the more it's about good communication. And finally, I think it's about empathy with people. Ultimately, we all work in people businesses, generally speaking, and your ability to build empathy and sell something rather than tell something is so important. Those are my 3 things.
Andy, thank you so much for contributing to the Better Bots podcast series.
My great pleasure. Nice to see you.
As always, thank you so much for listening to the Better Bots podcast series. If you have any questions, if you would like to see that we cover a certain topic, if you would like to contribute, if you would like to learn more about our wider work, or if you would like to hear about our partner program, how you can work with us, please do get in touch. We are always delighted to hear from you. The best way to do so is via our website www.better-boards.com or simply write info@better-boards.com. Thank you.